Up next on Inside the SCCA, Racers Roundtable. Welcome to Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Belansky. We are getting together tonight for something a little different. I like to think that I am not the sole arbiter of what is interesting in this world we love, called the SCCA. So every once in a while, I like to bring on someone and have no idea what we're going to talk about. So this is what this is. I've got three folks with us. I have Gabe Fehribach from Indiana and Paul Jensen from Colorado. Trevor, where are you out of?
I am currently out of Palmer, Massachusetts.
Palmer, Massachusetts. Trevor Hermance out of Palmer, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you?
Good evening.
Good. Absolutely amazing.
All right, so I am going to start the show, though, like I do every time. And I don't know if you all have listened to the show, but I try to start the show with the exact same question every time. We're going to go around the room for this one. And it's a simple question, and I'm going to randomly pick Paul, because I think, like me, Paul, you are the elder statesman in the room. How did you get?
Gray hair show?
Yeah, I got a little of that in the scruffy parts.
Hair.
So, how did you get started in this sport that we love?
Oh, well, I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, the home of racing in the United States, I would think. In Indiana, I didn't really grow up around sports car racing. I grew up around circle track racing, going to the Speedrome and the Indy 500 and Anderson Speedway. A lot of great action up there at the High Banks and Anderson, midget racing mostly. And had some buddies that did midget racing.
Sure.
And helped them out a little bit from time to time, but never really got into it myself. And long story short, ended up out in Colorado and working at a car dealership. My brother owned an Acura dealership in Colorado Springs. And one weekend about 24 years ago, two of our employees, a service writer and a mechanic, took two Acura Integras, caged them, and decided to go get their SCCA road racing license.
And where
they came back?
Where was that at?
They went to their first driver's school in Deming, in New Mexico.
Oh, wow!
Yes, right down the New Mexico border.
Okay.
And we used to run regional races down there, and they came back from that first regional race weekend and driver's school, and they had permagrins on their faces. And I said, so it was really that much fun? And they said, oh, it just went on and on about it. I said, well, I need some of that in my life.
Yeah.
I said, well, what do I have to do to get involved in this? They said, well, you need a sports car. So I said, okay, any kind of sports car? Yeah, any kind of sports car you can drive. They have everything. I said, okay. So I went out that afternoon, found an old, ugly Mazda Miata. It was white, 1990, had a short nose crank, and it had purple mirrors, purple windshield wipers, purple brake calipers. And I bought it from this mechanic at the Mazda dealership down the street.
There you go.
2 weeks later, I had it caged and was on track.
Wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
Got my license later that year, and I've been racing ever since.
Cool. All right, Gabe. Same question. You're up. How did you get messed up with this sport?
Well, I have always been interested in cars. I've loved the idea of going fast and just pushing my body and the mind to the absolute limit, as well as machine. And couldn't afford it when I was younger, unfortunately. But as I got older, I got a good job. My dad got a better paying job. And one day we were like, what do we want to do? And I said, we want to race. So I went to Bondurant Racing School, which is now Radford, I believe. And then I took my advanced school at Bertil Ruse, And then in the process of figuring out, I always wanted to do open wheel cars.
Right.
And because I was a big fan of Indianapolis, the Indy 500. I grew up in Indiana. I'm from Indiana. I live in Indiana. So again, like Paul, central hub of racing. So racing is everywhere. So I was like, I want to do it. So I was kind of on the fence about Formula Continental because I'd heard of Formula Continental before. But then we found Alliance Autosport. Obviously, they run the FE2s, and talked to the late Scott Reddick, and he convinced me to get into an FE2, and I've never looked back since.
There you go. The rest is history.
Yes, sir.
All right, Trevor, you know the question. Bring it.
Okay. Well, my childhood was spent each summer, Memorial Day weekend, and then eventually Labor Day weekend, and then eventually this random middle weekend in October, and then eventually a weekend in July at this awesome campground that each morning we would get up a little bit later on. You'd have these really fast cars zooming around just in front of your tent or your pop-up trailer. And this was the infield camping that is Lime Rock Park. The pro race weekends there were a family tradition growing up. And technically, I joined the club at 16. My dad bought me membership for my 16th birthday, and I've kept it up ever since. As I got into the sport from a sporting aspect rather than just, oh, well, I'm going to ride my bike around all day, but it's really cool to see these things zooming around at the same time. Realized that corner working was a great way to really sink into the depths of of racing, become a part of it, and that's been my primary method of involvement with the club through these 17 years. But as Paul put it, you got to have a sports car if you want to drive. And so I got such a fine example as a 2000 Hyundai Elantra wagon, kind of like the sedan you see zooming around in my background, to do some rallycrossing with at one point. Did a season of that, had a blast. Road rally and rallycross are fine examples of anything can be a sports car if you try hard enough. Have done a little bit of everything in the club since, except for get that club racing license and do some regionals or enduro racing with the SCCA. Got to get that off the list soon. But yeah, I've just come at the club and into it and called it my family through my adult life now, and happy to join you all tonight.
Cool. Now, when did you start flagging? You said 17 years ago, right?
Yep. So I sort of was a hanger-on for a divisional flagging and fire school before I was even 16, which with minor laws, especially in Connecticut, it's right. Iffy. But I went to a couple of those, and around 2007, right around my senior year of high school, is when I finally was able to get trackside and learn the trade.
Well, and the reason I ask is I was flag chief for New York region for 3-4 years, and I remember, and I don't think we crossed paths that much. So I think it was right at the end of my tenure.
No, but happy to we still do this. Yes. You know. Through Zoom, cross country, whatever.
Absolutely. So, all right. So there's just a couple of ground rules here. Okay. I have always said from the start of starting the podcast that we would I keep this. Well, I have a really great relationship with SCCA National, as I'm sure people know because I get a lot of guests from National on here. I keep the podcast independent of the club because sometimes we have some difficult things to talk about. We are not a perfect club. We don't always do things the right way. And I don't have a problem talking about things that are not necessarily positives because I think it's important to talk about or maybe try to come up with some solutions. I will say, though, that my only ground rule is that we keep things respectful. And it's a solutions-oriented discussion if we do talk about something that needs a solution, because I have no idea what we're going to talk about. Gabe and Paul and Trevor have not told me their topics. That was the goal of this podcast, so I have no idea where we're going to. This might be all, roses and grape juice, and that would be great. But if it's not, that's cool, too. So, all right, let's open the discussion. I think we're going to go right in the same order that we just ran the runaround here. So, Paul, you are up. What is our first topic for the evening?
Let's talk about the great big elephant in the room this last week after the Super Tour event at VIR.
Okay.
You were there
well,
in the announce booth.
I was broadcasting from California. This was not one of my races to be at the racetrack. Greg and I split them up, but yes, I was there in absentia for the whole weekend.
All right. So how much video feed did you have at your location?
I get it all.
You got it all?
I get everything Greg gets.
How many cameras did they have? I didn't see any of it online.
Well, it was a wet weekend, so most of the time we had 12 cameras. Every once in a while we'd go down a camera or two, but yeah, essentially we do 12 cameras at every race.
Were you able to see much through the spray?
Depends.
Yeah.
Depends on whether the camera was looking at the spray or was behind the spray.
Yeah. So tell me your thoughts as to what transpired in the Spec Miata race. I've read several different people's accounts. Was it as bad as people are making it out to be? Was it just a perfect storm of wet track, too many cars?
Well,
too much wet grass on the runoff areas.
Yeah, I mean the Spec Miata race in particular was, yes, all of the above. I mean, it was, and we're obviously talking about Saturday and not Sunday.
Yes.
Sunday was dry, although I do think that there was more nuttiness almost on Sunday than there was on Saturday, because of the fact that it was dry and racers being racers want to get after it. Obviously, I don't ever believe there's too many cars. So there were a whole lot of cars. And obviously, the more cars that you have on the racetrack, that tends to make for less open real estate to deal with. And when you have all of those cars during a wet session, spray is probably your number one enemy, visibility. And then obviously you have the good part about VIR is there aren't gravel traps to get stuck in, and the bad part about VIR is there aren't gravel traps to get stuck in, which means you've got a lot of wet areas. And, if you listened at all to the broadcast over the weekend, I suggested all weekend long that the most important job you could do all weekend long was to keep your car between the white lines. Because, there was a good chance that if you didn't, you were going to hit something. And if you didn't hit something, you might not be able to get back to the racetrack. If you can't get back to the racetrack, you have to stop the race, basically slow it down to go send out people to grab you. And if you hit something, well, we know what happens when people hit something. So it was not ideal. But the key is that I think people have to mind their skill level as a driver and mind the capabilities of your particular vehicle that you're racing in, depending on what class it is. And it's the driver's job to keep the car between the lines. That's my thoughts on that. Did you get a chance to watch?
I did not get a chance to watch. I've just read a lot of the comments. I was a Spec Miata racer for years, transitioned about 12 years ago into production and run a F production Miata now. So, I've been in Miata fields as many as 86 cars back in the day. So I know what it's like to be on a track with a lot of cars like that. Right. That being said, VIR has some peculiarities about it. The fact that all of the runoff area is sloped down to those tire walls, and when you go off, they're like a magnet and they just suck you in.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they tore up a lot of equipment.
Yeah, there was. Surprisingly, I think maybe surprisingly in my mind, they didn't tear up as much as I expected them to. Miatas in particular, as I'm sure they bounce off of things.
They take a licking.
Yep. Yeah. And they'll bend a little here and bend a little there, and sometimes you can pull out the Polish torque wrench and bend it back into bend it back into shape enough to get back out there. So, yeah, there were some pretty big shunts. There was a Lotus Elise who went off in the touring race on Saturday that I would have put a week of pay on that car not being back on the racetrack on Sunday, but they put it back together, and it was a different color car on Sunday. But they put it back out there, and I think it probably still had some residual things that needed to be, I think they probably needed a good alignment rack because it didn't run as well on Sunday. But
yep, I know that car. So
yeah, so and we talked about a lot of talk about VIR as a racetrack on the Facebook groups and stuff. Conversation started on the Spec Miata page, and then rolled over onto and then I put out a post and got a lot of thoughts on that as well. And
pot stirring here going on.
Yeah. Well, no, I actually wanted to have a good discussion about it because
Yeah, absolutely.
And that discussion was mostly respectful. Tony Ave brought out a good part is that no wall has ever jumped in front of his car and attacked it. So
True.
And I think there's something to be said about that. But there's also something to be said about how you place those walls and where you place them. And I wasn't part of that thought process. I don't know enough about what was there. Because there's a gap for me at VIR from when I moved out west in 2014. Because when I left, there were none of those walls were there. And then when I went back out there for the runoffs this past year, all of a sudden they were there. So I'm sure it was not last year where they went up, but I'm guessing they went up over time. But there does seem to be some peculiar choices as to where they put them.
Well, they put the walls there to keep the cars out of the woods.
Right. Right. And,
back in the day, the first iteration of VIR, cars would run all the way to the trees.
Right. Right.
So
it strikes me, and Gabe or Trevor, have either of you driven at VIR?
I have twice, a Super Tour.
Okay.
2020 and 2021.
So
the FE2.
So
only virtually for me.
You've only virtually. Okay. I've done a lot of laps there virtually as well. It does strike me, Gabe, that maybe gravel traps would have been smarter than Armco in some of these areas.
Yeah, definitely, because gravel trap not only it slows the car down very quickly, right? You basically bury your car in that kitty litter, in that sand, and it stops that car. So number one, stops cars sooner. It's not 250 down from turn one wall, and but the track is the same for everybody, and that was the sort of the view that I have on it. Like I said, I've driven VR twice, so I'm not the most experienced in the FE2. I did spin, pushing the limit. You can't find the limit unless you go over it. I did drive it in the wet. I went off turn one, plenty of times, but I was able to get back on, fortunately. But the track is the same for everybody. If there's if there's 60 people not going off and 2 people have a really big wreck, I'm sort of leaning towards those 2 people are maybe at fault here, not the track.
Right.
Now, granted, I mean, the walls, especially at the end of the back straight, going to the roller coaster now, they added that brand new one, I think, last year.
Mm-hmm.
That's bit a lot of people. I know it has. But, the walls are the same for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think one of the things that makes it very, present of mind at VIR is the way their rescue crews respond to tracks, or incidents. And I try very hard not to be critical of rescue crews because they have a hard job to do, and it can be dangerous. But they because of the way they do things, they wait till there's most of the cars are collected by a pace car before they go out. In many cases, there are no hot pulls at VIR, and I know other racetracks do. Right. And because of that, every incident for the most part ends up in a full course yellow. And yes. I think maybe if there were less full course yellows, there would be less discussion about all of the other stuff.
Right. I think it's sort of like a compounding effect.
Yeah.
You get in this brain, you get in your brain as you're heading out on course at VIR. There's gonna be a full course yellow in this race. It could be on lap 1, turn 1. It could be on the final lap. I
Right.
got to get to the front right now, and I'm gonna do whatever it takes to get there.
Right.
And then that's when you can cause more bonehead moves.
Right.
It's a compounding effect.
Yep.
I
Yes,
agree.
absolutely.
Paul, when you said you were a Spec Miata driver that has switched now to production, may I ask why you've switched to production and you didn't stay with Spec Miata?
I ran Spec Miata the whole entire time I ran Spec Miata. It was a regional class until the last year I ran Spec Miata.
Okay.
And that was the year the Spec Miata went national. The runoffs were at Topeka, first year at Topeka, and
Right.
I was trying really hard to score enough points to be able to run my Miata at Topeka. Halfway through the season, I had still not scored a point.
Mm-hmm.
We had in Colorado in the Rocky Mountain division at that time, we had about 48 cars that were running in the national series, and you had to score in the top 10 to score a point. I ran in the top 10 several races and then had incidents and finished outside the top 10.
Right.
So there I sat halfway through the season without scoring a point. And I said, well, I want to go to the runoffs. They're in Topeka. It's in my backyard. And so I switched and ran a showroom stock B car the rest of the season, qualified for the runoffs, and went to Topeka.
And then you
so that was my first runoffs.
Right.
And after that, I never went back to Spec Miata again.
Okay.
I ran GT Light for a few years after that, and then I got a production car.
Got it. The kind of the reason I asked, I was wondering if it was something having to do with the way Spec Miata races have a reputation of running. And I say reputation, and I choose that word really carefully, because I've been doing this since 1986. In varying forms of this sport. I've been a driver, I've been a flagger, I've been a race official. I've done lots of this sport. And I don't particularly think Spec Miata racers are any, better or worse as far as contact and aggressiveness than any other class that's out there. I think there are some things that are inherent when you have huge fields. And there's a lot of bumping and grinding that goes on because there is a perceived desperation to get to the front in a short period of time. But I don't think that's unique to Spec Miata. So that's why I was wondering, everyone is for even this weekend, all these cars, everyone gets to the edge of the fence when a Spec Miata race comes on because there's huge fields, which means there's going to be something exciting that's going to happen. It's kind of inherent.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people equate exciting with cars going off the course and bumping and all this kind of stuff. So there's that. So, all right, that's awesome. Good conversation on that. Let's move on. Gabe, what did you bring for us today?
All right. So my dad was the one who told me to come on his podcast, and I said, no, I don't want to because I'm not that interesting. I haven't done a whole lot because I'm pretty young. But he was like, well, you could talk about going from sim racing, which was what I did when I was younger, all the way up to what I do now in the FE2. And I was like, nah, that's tons of people have done that. So I'm going to talk about youth in the SCCA.
Love it.
And maybe the lack thereof, depending on what you the way you look at it. So I'm 23 years old. I turned 24 in 2 weeks, but I still consider myself, at least for now, part of the youth. Maybe in like a year or two, I'll be one of the old guys.
No.
Pushing 25,
No.
But
Paul and I are sitting here with a big smile on our face.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, how I got into the SCCA as a young person and why I can't get any of my friends into it.
Oh, that's a great idea. Let's talk about that
and try to figure out why that doesn't happen. See if we can't come up with some solutions.
So let me ask you this before you go.
Yeah.
With that as the premise, and before we dig deep, so you have friends that you can't get interested in the SCCA. Are they interested in cars in other types of forms of enthusiast, or
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes, I got
great.
lots of friends that are in cars. They
Got
do
it.
drifting. They
Cool.
do all kinds of stuff with cars,
All right,
and but no SCCA road racing.
Okay, so
So, as I just mentioned, one of my very very good friends, very into cars, loves Billy. He builds his own Miata, and he drifts it. And I said, well, have you ever thought about taking it and put it in an SCCA regional race? It's like, nah, I really don't want to. Well, why? Well, number one, drifting, it's cheap. You buy a cheap $100 set of tires on Amazon, and you call it good for an event. Entry fees around $50. The local track that I'm from, down here in Southern Indiana, we have a lot of ovals over high banks that do drifting events, figure eight racing. It's about $50 for an entry for a day. Compare that to, say, a Super Tour entry fee.
mm-hmm.
You're looking at $750 there. And like we were just talking about with the Spec Miata race, how much green flag racing did you get?
Right.
Versus how much can you get in the drift event? Sure, there are incidents, but it's nowhere near as much. So I kind of want to look at some different. I actually have a sheet over here with bullet points on it that I want to talk about.
Okay.
So I used Grid Life as an example.
Sure.
If you ever heard of Grid Life,
I have.
And one of the first things I noticed was being as I'm a young person, I went on Instagram.
Sure.
And I checked Grid Life's follower count. It's 134,000. Does anybody know what SCCA's Instagram account has?
It is not 134,000.
Is it more or less?
It's significantly less.
41.9 thousand.
Okay, so a third.
About a third.
Okay.
That's on Instagram.
That is on Instagram because that's what young people use.
Yep.
Even I did check the Facebook as well. Facebook again has more. It's only about 10,000 more. But I think that's part of why SCCA's age demographic is a little bit higher. So a lot more Facebook users versus
That makes
Instagram
sense.
users. So that's something that I think that SCCA could really do better. And if you go look at Grid Life's social medias, they have videos, edited videos, montages, super crazy, just highly edited marketing tools, basically. And they're posting every day, all the time, every day. You go look at SCCA's marketing, their social media, and it's lacking severely.
No one will argue that.
So I think that's something that that SCCA can improve upon. Maybe even hire a social media director if they don't have it. I assume they have one already. But get somebody in there. Hey, for young people, we got to start posting more on Instagram. Get some cool reels on there. Try to post videos more on YouTube. See what the SCCA is all about. And then I also want to talk about cost analysis in there. So as I said at the beginning of the podcast, I went to Bondurant. It's now called Radford. It was out in Arizona.
Yep.
And I say the whole trip for me to do their advanced road racing school was about $8,000. I don't know if very many 20-year-olds can afford $8,000 cash out of pocket. Here you go. I'm gonna go drive a race car for 4 days. Versus again, Grid Life or any sort of track rental or drifting, $50, $100. You drive your passenger car there, you drive it around, you leave. Now, one thing I will give SCCA is the Track Night in America.
Right.
I'm gonna go do a Track Night in America with my brother in his 2017 Mustang EcoBoost at the National Corvette Museum in May. I'm very excited to learn what that's all about, to kind of see the demographics there. If there's any younger people that say, hey, you can drive your passenger car here, drive it as fast as you are comfortable, and then drive it home.
Right.
And it's relatively cheap. So I think when I've seen people also talk about the rising costs, the current economy is kind of bad.
Yeah, it's tough.
We'll say it's tough out there, and racing I feel like is one of the things that's on the back burner for a lot of people, especially a lot of sponsorships and marketing companies. Oh, what's the first thing to get cut from a marketing budget? It's mostly going to be racing, probably.
Right. So let's chew on your first 2 points for a second.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we'll go back. Paul, you and I are, like I said, the elder statesmen on this list. Cost. Let's start with cost. When we started, we complained about the same thing, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
But when I started, the first year I drove my Spec Miata, I drove it back and forth to the track because I had plates on it. And I was careful when I was on track because I knew I had to drive it home on Sunday night.
Right.
Then I got a flatbed trailer. Then I got a motorhome and an enclosed trailer.
Yep.
You know, and it just goes down that road.
Right.
You know, when I first started racing 22 years ago, the majority of the paddock were flatbed open trailers.
Right.
And you know, it's changed a lot.
It has.
I think the reason why it's changed is after 2008, only the well-heeled racers or fairly well-heeled racers or those that just couldn't quit are the ones that stuck around.
Right.
Through that last big recession.
You know, Gabe talked about going to Bondurant. There's a lot of areas in this country where back when you and I did this, got started, you know, most regions held a school every year.
That's what I did.
And we could get our license without going to a Bondurant.
Yep, a couple $100.
And it was a little longer of a process maybe because you had to go to 2 schools and then you had to do your 2 regionals before you could get your regional license. Then you had to do 4 nationals before you get to your national license. But even if you were running a lower cost car like a Miata or an IT car or a Formula V, you could get your national license for far less than $8,000.
Oh yeah.
Without even thinking about it. Now, it took longer. Maybe the instruction wasn't as good. The one thing I will say about professional schools, Gabe, is that you learn a lot more about how to drive a car fast at a Bondurant, whereas in an SCCA school, you're learning more about how to drive a car safely. And I think that's the key difference between those 2 schools. So, but you don't have that option. Isn't there as many places? Cal Club, one of the biggest regions in the country, doesn't do a driver school.
Right. And I actually, before I looked this up, I know Pit Race. They do, I think it's coming up in June. I think at the end of June they're doing, or beginning of June, they're doing a like kind of double regional and school.
Right.
They do that. And I think the entry fee I looked up was $350. And I think Waterford Hills also does some. I've been to Waterford.
Right.
You know, Alex Della Torre, he's a great guy up there. But like, yeah, $350 for the Pit Race school entry fee versus $8,000 for Bondurant.
Right. And Gabe, you know what you're saying is so true. I mean, I would not have gotten into a race car for the first time had my dad not had a race car. You know, and my first 2 driver schools were gifts for graduating from high school. You know, but what about kids who don't have that opportunity, who don't have that background? You know, it was very, what I'm trying to say, not that it's right, don't get me wrong, is that for kids, it's always been hard. Maybe it's harder now, but it's always been expensive, and we've always been a club, and maybe and I don't want us to be, but we've always been a club who's skewed older because of the cost of what it does to do what we do.
Right.
So how do we change that, Gabe? How do we get the grid lifers to come and play?
Yeah. The first thing that I do is word of mouth, advertising by mouth. Every time I see somebody that shows any of the slightest interest in asking me about what I do in my racing, because you know, around here, Southern Indiana is stock cars, ARCA, midgets, sprint cars, short track oval racing, you know, dirt oval racing. Not, I've been to the Watkins Glen, you know, I've sat on the podium at a Super Tour at Watkins Glen. I've been to VIR. I've been to Mid Ohio in an FE2, a winged formula car.
Right.
And they're like, well, that's really cool. How do you get into this? And I always try and tell them, like, hey, you got to start here, here, and here. And I always lay out exactly. And now that I know about this SCCA schooling, I think I would point them in that direction, as opposed to, say, the Bondurant or Skip Barber, Bertil Rouge. I didn't know about the SCCA schools. I didn't know those existed.
Yeah,
I had no clue that was a thing. I probably would have done that instead.
Yep. That's a problem.
If I had known, instead of spending all of that money to go fly out to Arizona by myself when I was 19.
Yep. So, Trevor, let me bring you into this, because you're wearing the track night sweatshirt there.
There you go.
You're representing for track night. I've
and the
been
hat too, but
and the hat. Okay, yep, I can see the hat. I'm looking at the production monitor that I use is really really tiny. I have to
it's
look.
not the best webcam either.
I have to look over here, which is not good for
Yeah.
TV, to see the good pictures. But anyway, so you've been to track night. Tell me about the type of the demographic of people that you see when you go to a track night.
It's a little bit of everything, which is the best you could hope for giving people a first taste or even just a home with the club. We are a very strong region or part of the country for it. Of course, the events are not exactly region run, although in many cases they're supported by personnel who have history with the local regions and are leaders among them. But in New England, we've had a few tracks now that sell out practically every event. And since the program's inception, it's been worthwhile to add more dates without having to do funny business with pricing and whatnot. Right. It's not true around the country, but for when it clicks with the people that are supporting the events, and especially for those people that have never been exposed to this type of environment before, and they start spreading the word, it should be said this has also been one of the club's more successful digital marketing efforts, which obviously skews towards a younger audience in many cases. Then they turn out, and 95% of the time they have such a blast they can't wait till the next one.
Yeah. So at your region, in your area, because track night is, like you said, supported by the region, but it really is a national program. National staff are the ones that come up with the plan. They hire the people, sometimes regional people from around the area to run it. Do your local regions do any outreach during the events?
Yes. I have to say that tentatively because it's been a little bit hard to keep everybody in the proper understanding of just how many people come through. In our part of the country, Kathy Barnes is a staffer on the track night side and a maven on the New England region side.
She is.
And she's got the exact number in her head at the ready at all times of how many drivers have started with a track night and gone on to get a competition license for wheel-to-wheel racing, or they do time trials now, or I don't know if anybody's gone to the extent of getting a pro license yet, but I bet it's coming.
Yeah.
So there have been many success stories here, but I'm sure all three of you have seen in your respective times at the SCCA that people find their niche involvement in the club, and they get kind of tunnel vision on the club racing program's success, or the team's success if you're running with a particular team, and it's hard to keep eyes on the periphery of where new people might be coming in from. But the reality is they're there and they do make it through. And you kind of have to use the terms like that. There have traditionally been barriers to entry for new members in the club, and the whole thought process of track night and some other of these experiential programs has been to knock those barriers down and open the floodgate a little bit more.
We've had extensive conversations on this podcast about converting X to road racing. How do we get the track night people to go road racing? How do we get the autocross people to go road racing? And one of the things that I find, and that has always been, I think, a large thought process amongst the club. And after thinking about it and having conversations with a lot of people over a lot of different adult beverages and on this podcast, something that Hayward Wagner said at one of our podcasts has always stuck with me, and it was one of the best things I've heard so far. While it's nice to convert people, to bring them on that will go on, why is that such a big deal? If we have people who are having fun at a track night and never come to a club race, that's great. If we have people who are just who love autocross and don't have the desire to go wheel-to-wheel racing and all that goes with that, that's great. Yep. And if we can bring some young people to a track night who have the itch to go wheel to wheel racing, and we scratch that itch, and we can get them to show up at a school, that's great too. So that's what I like about track night, is that it's the low barrier to entry. There's a lot of them at some really cool racetracks. And what I do find, though, is that even though the goal may not be to necessarily have to convert these people, I find that the efforts to convert, or the efforts to let people at track nights know about all the other things the club are doing, are sometimes lacking. And that is on the region, not the national, who are there running it. Regions would be smart if they had the time, and I know we're all strapped for time because we're volunteers, to send someone to a track night with the sole purpose of walking through the track night paddock, shaking hands, and handing out a pamphlet that has a website on it, our Instagram, our Facebook, and telling people, if you're having fun here and all you want to do is this, great, but there's a bunch of other things that we do, and here's how you check it out.
Yeah. We've been fairly effective out here in Colorado. We're lucky for a very sparsely populated state. We have a lot of club racing tracks, and we hold Track Night in America events at typically 2 different tracks here in Colorado each year. A couple times at High Plains and at least once at PPIR. And what we've done is not so much trying to get them to come out for club racing, but get them to come out for time trial events.
Right.
And we run our time trial events in conjunction with all of our road racing weekends.
Right.
We have a couple of time trial sessions. So that's the next logical step for those folks. They don't have to cage a car. They bring the same car they brought out for Track Night in America. We just slap a transponder in it, and now they're competing, and they like that.
Right. So, Gabe, I want to get to the rest of your points in a second, but I do want to get a chance for Trevor to jump on and talk about what he wanted to talk about when he came on, and then we'll come back. Was that okay with you?
For sure. 100%.
And I will say one other thing about your social media comments, about the lack of social media engagement, the lack of content. You are 100% correct. Everybody at the club at National knows it. The efforts to do better are exponentially better than they used to be.
Well, I'm glad.
But it's still a long ways to go.
Still,
yeah,
absolutely.
There's still a long ways to go. And your observations are spot on. And I know there's the want to be able to do more, but it does require probably a full-time social media person who they don't have at the moment. And I think everybody would agree that we should have one. And it's coming up with the money for that, which is sometimes hard.
Right.
But we'll talk about that more. All right, Trevor, you're up. You've been patient.
Right.
What you got for us?
No worries. 2023 is the year of the big 100th anniversary running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans in France this year. Fingers are crossed as hard as they can be, but best as I can tell, we'll be one of the lucky few people representing the SCCA in the United States on the track side as a flagger there.
Really?
There will be quite a few of us. It'll be my second time going over there, but just wanted to throw it out there that this is a cool thing that if you join the club and put in a little time volunteering at the trackside, not having to buy your race tickets or camping passes and all those other things that get very expensive, you can let it take you wherever you might fancy. And kind of ties into our global discussion that we're having tonight, I would think. But my whole appreciation for what the club does for me and just all the people that are that find it worth their money and time to be members is that it's a connectedness with the greater motorsports world that that you can't say is just down to one company's being generous with I don't know, their entertainment product or something like that.
Right.
It's a way to connect with the racing world in almost any way you can find. less than 8 weeks away now. Still some travel things I have to get, but they're notoriously late with actually confirming people. But I've got on decent authority that that'll be making my second trek out there. Wouldn't miss the 100th for anything. I fell in love with the race when I was early on in high school, and that's my big heartthrob is the endurance sports car racing. Sprints are great, open wheels great. I do a little bit of everything in the club, but racing through the night in the French countryside is awesome.
All right, dripping sarcasm alert. You can take an SCCA license and go to LeMans? No, I'm just
absolutely.
We're going to talk more about that in just a second because I want to dig deeper. I have completely forgotten to take my breaks today, so let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get into that just a little bit more because we had some conversations about that here as well. So let's do that, and then we'll be back in just a second. Stay with us. This is Inside the SCCA, our roundtable for racers discussion. We'll be right back. Decades of sports car racing success comes from Goodyear Racing Tires' dedication to grassroots motorsports. Too many trophies and championships to count, and a commitment to continuing that tradition fuels continued tire development. From the professional levels of motorsports to the pinnacle of amateur racing in the SCCA, Goodyear Racing Tires are made for winning trophies. Follow @RaceGoodyear on Facebook or scan the QR code. Goodyear Racing is more driven.
Sentinel by Candelaria Racing Products is a comprehensive motorsports video system, incorporating live streaming, local recording, picture-in-picture, flag status, leaderboards, data overlays, and more. Perfect for endurance racing, sprint racing, and HPDE, Sentinel includes everything you need to get started. With the ability to control the live feed from the cloud, and GPS Auto Start will never miss an on-track moment. What are you waiting for? Get your Sentinel today.
Vintage Racers for Rescues. Racers rescuing dogs and cats from high-kill rural shelters and high-risk situations. Virginia and North Carolina have the third highest euthanasia rate in the U.S., and Vintage Racers for Rescues founders Robin and Dave Handy decided to do something about it. Vintage Racers for Rescues is a 501c3 charity that saves between 300 and 400 animals every year, nursing them back to health, finding foster homes, and eventually forever homes. VintageRacersForRescues.com. Use the QR code to find them on the web or to make a donation.
Corgi Sport is your one-stop shop for new and used mini parts and accessories. Whether it's driven on the street or on the racetrack, we have everything you need. From the small interior parts all the way to used and rebuilt motors. And with our sponsorship of the GPM race team, who travel to more than 30 tracks east of the Mississippi, we have a built-in delivery system that can save money on delivering large parts. Our line of Corgi Sport apparel celebrates the special bond between mini owners and their dogs. Mention this ad for a 10% discount at corgisport.com.
Out of chicane at night, and they just clearly had an
Welcome
extra 100
back
horsepower.
to Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Belansky. Got a great panel of guests today. Gabe Fehribach, Paul Jensen, Trevor Hermance. Talking about a lot of different things. At the moment, we're talking about flagging. We've basically touched on a lot of pretty cool stuff so far, and I love the fact that we're doing this tonight. So I gave out the sarcasm alert, Trevor. So explain to me how you were able to get invited to go flag at LeMans. I mean, where did you learn what you needed to learn for them to trust you to go flag at one of the most important races in the world?
As far as learning, it's all practice from the lower grassroots. I say lower, but the beginner levels of wheel-to-wheel racing, whether it be regionals, schools, or nationals, majors, whatever the terminology may be at the time. Up to finding your local pro race if you've got an IMSA or an SCCA pro event nearby. 9 times out of 10, you'll be welcome to participate with the crews that staff those. The invitation side of it, or getting the connection to somebody who hopefully can speak English pretty well, as I am not bilingual with the French yet. Should be, but I keep putting that off. It's that can be the tricky part. But at the same time, it's evidence of just how much of a network this whole family of race enthusiasts, flaggers, licensed drivers, whatever your way of involvement is. We in New England region had another member who went overseas to try it a couple of years before I first went in 2018, and he did so through a contact that previously had actually come to North America and worked Montreal for the Formula One Grand Prix.
Right.
So this member had been in Montreal, met this Frenchman, and he said, he should come over and work Le Mans with me at some point. Yeah, why not? As soon as you get the in there, you build a rapport with somebody who has enough, responsibility on that side with their event, the local event.
Right.
You can create an account on the Le Mans website and be in touch through Facebook or whatever your social media of choice, email, and make sure everything's good to go.
I said sarcasm alert because I knew the answer to the question.
Of course.
There's been a group from Milwaukee region that has gone to Le Mans for, I don't know if they still go, but they went for a lot of years, and that's how I learned about it. We did a keynote at the convention with John Doonan, who is the president of IMSA, and he got his start in the SCCA. He was also the president of Mazda and instrumental in all of the spec this and spec that and FE2 having a Mazda motor in it and all of the things that Mazda does with the SCCA. And one of the things he talks about in our keynote, we talk about extensively, is how the fact that IMSA could not do their races without our SCCA flaggers. And for those who might not know, this weekend is the Long Beach Grand Prix. And the entire flag corps from Long Beach Grand Prix will be SCCA racers, SCCA flaggers. And we support that race here, Cal Club does, with a lot of personnel beyond even the flaggers. We do a lot of stuff with the Grand Prix, and they've done it for the whole 48 years that it's been going on. And but if you want to go to an IndyCar race on any of the non-ovals and flag, you're going to find SCCA flaggers at those events. And if you want to go, there's this really cool race. It's in the Principality of Monaco. If you ever want to race there, or flag there, F1 takes our flaggers too. It might take a letter and a little bit of work to get there and get the approval. If you go to Montreal first, it helps you go to any other F1 race. That's my advice. If you want to go flag any of the F1 races around the world, go to Montreal. And flag there, or go to Mexico City and flag there. That's probably the easiest way in. And then once you've done one, they get you on the list, and then that makes getting invited to go to some of these other ones a lot easier. But you can do it, and that's one of the perks of going through and becoming a flagger through the SCCA. So, so what was it like? And we're going to move on in just a second. But real quick, I got to ask, what's it like? Is there champagne on the corner? Is there croissants everywhere? Do they deliver croissants to the corner?
No, you're kind of on your own for the food side. I think there is champagne at the finish, but I sadly actually missed the very end in 2018. I had to leave a little bit earlier than planned. But my particular location was within walking distance of a bakery and a supermarket. So
perfect.
I was just kind of going with the flow with my hosts. They set me up with a tent and sleeping bag, stuff that would be a little more difficult to fly with. The same offers on the table this year, but I'm going a little longer, so I'm not sure if I'm going to rent a camper van or some such. But the host meal every day was a baguette and some kind of their version of Spam, really, ham in a can. Real plain stuff, but you could tell it's what got them through world wars and stuff like that. So it was kind of fun.
Cool.
But yeah, just great living by the trackside, just like you would at home. But it's Le Mans. It's a big deal.
Cool. All right, I'm going to squeeze another break in here real quick, and then we'll get back to Gabe's. How many more bullets do you have, Gabe?
I got 2 more bullet points.
Okay, we'll do 2 more bullets, and then we'll do a quick whip around of everybody to see if there's any last thoughts. We'll do that when we come back. This is Inside the SCCA. Don't go away. Decades of sports car racing success comes from Goodyear Racing Tires' dedication to grassroots motorsports. Too many trophies and championships to count, and a commitment to continuing that tradition fuels continued tire development. From the professional levels of motorsports to the pinnacle of amateur racing in the SCCA, Goodyear Racing Tires are made for winning trophies. Follow at Race Goodyear on Facebook or scan the QR code. Goodyear Racing is more driven. The Roadkeeper HD video and data logger was developed using our experience in motorsports, driving experiences, and beyond. It brings dual stream HD video combined with high-quality GPS data within reach of everyone at the track or on the road. Travinci Systems is an official Runoffs contingency sponsor, and it's not too late to sign up. On-site registration is available at the contingency desk in Tech. The Roadkeeper HD meets SCCA's requirements for forward-facing cameras. Take advantage of 2022 Runoffs pricing for the Roadkeeper HD, $324 plus shipping. That's $75 off. Offer is good through Christmas.
Grass Paddock Motorsport provides Mini Cooper race car rentals, trackside support, and coaching at tracks all over the eastern half of the country. GPM provides podium-capable rentals for B-Spec, the fastest-growing class of racing in the SCCA for 3 years running, and now the 4th largest class overall. We have a unique approach where our cars are located near the track you want to race instead of being in a central location with large towing fees. Come join us at Grass Paddock Motorsports, where Grass Paddock is an attitude and not a location. Mention this ad for a 10% discount and find us at www.grasspaddock.com.
Racing for Heroes is proud to be a partner of Inside the SCCA. RFH is a nonprofit devoted to helping veterans suffering from the seen and unseen wounds of war through racing and our range of programs. RFH's programs include health and wellness, motorsports therapy, community outreach, education, and employment. Visit racingforheroes.org to learn more and find out how you can help. Cruise Associates is honored to have sponsored this message. And we're back on Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Belansky. My guest tonight, Gabe Fehribach, Paul Jensen, Trevor Hermance. Talking a lot of different stuff. By the way, talk about social media. Let's hit the subscribe button, smash the like button. That's what the kids say.
Yes, sir.
That's right. Hit that bell so you get alerted that we're doing this on the YouTube, on the Racing Network on YouTube. I also want to let people know, deep tease here. We have a new podcast that we're going to debut on the Racing Wire Podcast Network here pretty quick. It's another SCCA member, and I can't wait to have him on here. He's just started out, and he's doing a great job, so I'm looking forward to that. We'll talk more about that. And we're going to do a joint podcast together to introduce his stuff, so it'll be fun. Noah Hambaye, I'm sure I've butchered your name, Noah, in the chat, says the club should crowdsource social media to members. A strategy that leverages members will outperform a club-only strategy. You are absolutely 100% correct. The key is finding the ways to get to talk the club members to stop wrenching on their car for 10 minutes to shoot off an Instagram post.
Shoot off an Instagram video. Yeah. Make a quick little montage or a highlight.
Yep. Do a reel or a short or whatever you want to do.
Absolutely.
But when we're at the racetrack, Gabe, sometimes it's hard to remember that because we got a lot of stuff going on trying to get our cars on the racetrack.
Well, maybe you, but not me.
Okay, yeah, because right,
I'm attached to my phone.
You're
all the time.
You're an arriving driver too. You're one of those guys.
I own my car, but it's prepared by a prep shop. So I basically show up and I say, "Did you guys bring my car? Yeah, we did. Is it set up? Yeah. All right. Tell me when I have to go, and then I'll go out and." So we are a little short on time, but I do want to get to your other two bullets. So let's hit them real quick here. So bullet number, well, they kind of go together. So it was one giant thought here is if you think about things like car shows or Grid Life or like Tail of the Dragon, if you guys have ever heard that, it's US 129 and North Carolina 28. It's 11 cars of craziness through the mountains, and every year there's always big, huge, hundreds and hundreds of people go there and drive basically in a giant line, and you just see all kinds of cars. And it's sort of a run what you brung kind of mentality. That used to be the mentality back in the day. You build your own car and you race it. Versus today, the GCR is, that thick and trying to figure out and thumb through it. Okay, so this references this page, but then that references that page for this car, for this class. Okay, well, what about this motor in this specific car? It is kind of confusing. It can be very, very confusing. And I know there's a new class coming, a C-Spec T5. Frank Schwartz has been birthing. I'm looking into building a car for that. And so I've been thumbing through the GCR, and it can be tough. And I think, a lot of kids today in my generation, we don't want to follow rules.
Decades.
We want to say, hey, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it, and then I'm going to race it the way I want to race it. So there's kind of a, maybe not a disconnect, but say, hey, there's something that Track Night America does very well. When I was going through the registering process for my brother and my dad, is signing up, figuring out what you need for your car, what kind of car you can bring. I mean, the whole website for Track Night America is very well laid out, and I want to give huge props to the people who have done that. It's very well laid. But I think, the SCCA, especially when it comes to road racing, GCR, we need to figure out a way to simplify things, which is hard for building a car from basically the ground up, if that's what you're doing. But I think that's a way you can bring in more young people. It's basically a step-by-step. Say, hey, this is what you got to do, and you can drive this car on the track.
I always joke that the GCR is thicker than a Chicago phone book, and then the kids look at me and go, what's a phone book?
I'm sure nowadays nobody has home phones, so it's only that thick anyway.
Exactly. So, all right, what's your fourth bullet?
Well, that was kind of it. It was combining building the classes, and then also talking about Tail of the Dragon, which is, people building their own cars and coming out and have fun with their cars, which is what the SCCA does.
Right.
But they're building them to their own spec, not to the GCR or whatever. And I think if we maybe not open up the GCR, like, hey, just bring some spec'd out 3,000 horsepower, Mustang,
right,
or some Ken Block, rest in peace, Hoonigan or something,
right,
to go race. That'd be crazy. But I think we can really work together with National to get maybe like a guide or a step-by-step bullet point of how to, hey, you got a V6 Mustang, here's what you got to do to run in T4.
Let me just read this to you guys as an example of not where the club needs the club's not where it needs to be, but how it has he recognizes a lot of what you're saying, Gabe. And this year's track Tire Rack Time Trial Nationals has moved to the second weekend in October, and there is a partnership now with Grassroots Motorsports. They're going to host the Ultimate Track Car Challenge during the 4-day long event. They're going to bring 25 builds to this thing, which are very cool race cars, and find out who has built or bought the best track weapon. Also, Time Trial Nationals is going to be a partnership this year with the North America Time Attack Competition, Global Time Attack, Grid Life, and the SCCA. So
that sounds great.
It's an effort to bring all of these organizations together on a weekend so that they can all benefit, because it's not just us wanting to get more of the Grid Life people. The Grid Life people maybe want to get some of our people too. So, and I've always been a firm believer that, Paul, when you and I started this, we were the only game in town, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then NASA came along.
Yep.
They started doing a little this or that. And there were some local little regional. So, being from the Midwest, there's the Midwest Council. Waterford Hills has their own little track, their own little club. But for the most part, from a national level, SCCA was it. We had no competition. And we sat on our tuchuses for 50 years because we didn't have to do anything else. Mm-hmm. And now there's NASA, now there's Grid Life, now there is Champ Car World Series and LeMans and all of these different organizations. WRL, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
American Endurance Series,
right?
So it's fragmented so much over the last 2 decades that nobody has a big piece of the pie anymore.
Right. And National understands that. They're making moves to do what they can to be part of this global community of motorsports. It's not just the SCCA anymore. Lots of work to be done. But, I think there's the current regime is not the right word. I hate that word. But the current group of people at National, there's a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of folks who've been there for a long time. But there's also a whole new crop of younger folks, Abby Shear, Dan Dennehy, folks who've got experience outside of the SCCA who are also not part of the graying of the SCCA like Paul and I are. And we need people like Paul and I because, we're the ones who have some buying power, some money power to go and keep the club going. But if we don't leverage the younger folks who are working with the club, the kids like Gabe, and I can still call you a kid. That's not meant in any kind of
still down there,
derogatory
yeah.
way. And get everybody involved. I think the future is as bright now as it's ever been. Lots of work that still needs to be done. All right, let's do a quick whip around and see if anybody's got final starts. Let's start with Paul.
Yep. I like to think that, I like to look at a glass half full and not half empty. We do have a lot of things that we still do very well. SCCA as a group does a lot of things really well. We run very well organized, very safe events, typically. And we have room for improvement. Some of the things that we've brought on, like Track Night in America and our time trial program out here in the Rocky Mountain West, has become very, very popular. And I think that's something we can really build on.
Absolutely. Trevor?
Yeah. Just know that your role in the club, whether it be as a driver or a volunteer or crew person, if you're a member and you know a little bit of how to get involved or a process that you've been through that you can share with somebody to help get them involved, you're a helpful ambassador for keeping this whole thing going. It's a connection to the rest of the motoring world, and you'll have a home if you still find it's fun to come out and watch the cars go or make them go.
Gabe?
Yeah, I'm just gonna echo what these guys said. And also just if you are at the road racing circuits and you are taking videos, obviously frontward facing cameras are mandatory. Upload your videos to YouTube. Make YouTube videos. I do. Almost all of my races get uploaded to YouTube. Get some views. Share it with people you know. And it gets people talking, get people looking at YouTube. Kids love to watch YouTube.
Yep.
And can I say one last thing? That's
Sure.
Just kind of ended on a sad note, kind of. So April 12th today is the 1 year passing of Scott Reddick. I do run with Alliance Autosport. I love the family. I'm wearing my Alliance Autosport shirt right now. So I want to say to Rebecca Reddick, Pat and Dawn, his parents, Al and Surin, I'm thinking of you guys, and the SCCA of a whole. I think I can speak for everybody. We miss Scott greatly, and we're thinking of all of you guys and everybody at Alliance Autosport.
Thank you for that. We did a podcast right after Scott passed, a tribute podcast, and
I listened to that. It was gut wrenching.
Yeah, if you want to learn a little bit more of Scott and how much he meant to people, go back and listen to that, because he was quite a remarkable guy.
Yep.
And a lot of us, anybody who knows him misses him, no question about it. So
absolutely.
I just want to end on this note. We are the solution. The four of us here, the other club members, all of the stuff that we've talked about here, and whatever problems the club has or the things that the club needs to improve on that we haven't talked about, because there's more. The people who are the members are the solution. And just like any organization, 20% of the people do 80% of the work in the SCCA.
Right.
If you have time, if you have ideas, get involved in your local club, become a board member, volunteer, bring your ideas, bring your thoughts, especially if you're some of the younger folks. You guys have energy that we don't have. So I don't know any club that would turn down the opportunity to have some new blood in the administrative ranks to help out with all of that stuff. And we can all work together to make the club even better. And that's how I want to end for tonight. Come out, do it, have a good time doing it, and get involved. I did it. It's the best thing I ever did. So it's a good time, and you make good friends for life, as we all know. So do that. Gabe, Paul, Trevor, thank you. I appreciate it. Great conversation. For those who are watching or listening, we'll do this again in a couple of months. I think we should do this every couple of months. We'll get 4 more people to jump in and do the conversation again. And I appreciate all of your time. So, all right, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, listeners.
Appreciate the opportunity and listening to me ramble.
All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you're hearing or watching, subscribe to the Racing Wire Podcast Network or the Racing Network on YouTube, so you won't miss any episodes. It would also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. If it's a bad one, put it on someone else's social media page. Find out who our next guest is. Go to Racing Wire Net on the YouTube. on the Twitter. Inside the SCCA every week on Wednesday nights live on YouTube, and then Fridays on the podcast network. I'm Brian Belansky. Have yourself a fantastic weekend, and go play with cars.
Hi, I'm Kelton Jago, and this is Inside the SCCA.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the Racing Wire Podcast Network and Rule 15 Productions. This podcast is not affiliated with, endorsed, or sponsored by the Sports Car Club of America. The views expressed within are those of the host and our guests, and not that of the SCCA.